Really nice to see you. We're on YouTube now. Yeah. Okay, good. Actually, Guillaume, I can't see that big clock. Could you put it somehow behind the camera? Okay, I hope we've got this massive clock, so I hope you can't hear it ticking. Yeah, good. That's good. So, just so I know that how long to make the meditation. So very, very warm welcome. Welcome if you're joining us on YouTube as well. So great. Really, really great to see you on this well, this weekend part of our retreat, actually. So some of you might be just joining for the weekend. And some of you, of course, have been here all week to these morning sessions, which are 6 ways of going deeper in meditation. And yeah, so I'm Subhadra Mehti, and I'm here in the London Buddhist Shrine Room. And actually, we've got a lovely day. Well, we started at 7 this morning, and then basically today is all about imagination and opening to our imagination. So it's a bit like, you know, for those of us that have been on the retreat the whole week, we've been applying ourselves, dedicating ourselves, like really, really making lots and lots of effort. And today is the day where we can relax, actually, and see if we can open to something of the beyond, whatever that is, something of the mystery. And there's all different ways of connecting with that throughout the day. So this morning, we're going to be visualizing the Buddha, and I'm going to lead us through that and say why we're doing that. This afternoon, we've got a lovely session planned with Kusla Sara, which is from her bedroom studio, where it's going to be drawing. And even if you've never done any drawing before, really, really encourage you to come to that session. She's such a lovely teacher. She's been practicing Buddha since, you know, well, long time. And then in the evening, we've got poetry with Maitreya Bandhu. Again, lovely chance just to, you know, enjoy culture in a way. And again, even if you don't know much about poetry, it's a perfect session. And if you know, if you're avid in poetry, there'll be, you know, you'll really enjoy it as well. And then we've put an extra event on this evening, which is a big Buddhist ritual that Jnanavacha is going to lead. That'll be at 9 o'clock this evening. And that, yeah, we really wanted to end with something very, very special, end the full day with something very, very special. So we'll have that Buddhist ritual. And again, if you've never partaken of ritual before, this would be a great way to just learn, well, you know, why do we have ritual? What's it all about? And yeah, allow yourself to be surprised maybe. And then, of course, we have the morning tomorrow all together. And then, yeah, that'll be a chance to look at what our next steps are after the retreat. And we've been thinking a lot about next steps as well. And we've got some really good things planned if you want to take them up. Good. So, yeah, so today, as I was saying, is really themed around imagination. And it's the sixth day, but the 5th great stage of going deeper in meditation, spiritual rebirth. Because this day is all about imagination, I wanted to start with an image. And it's an image that I experienced myself. I was on a solitary retreat. It's the longest solitary retreat I've done. It was 2 months, and it was in the mountains in Spain. In a little hut just hidden in the woods in the mountains of Spain. I was completely on my own. I was being looked after by a resident community that lived, you know, quite a bit away. Every week they would bring like my food and leave it in the dustbin as it happened, and I would collect it. In other words, I didn't see anyone during that whole 2 months, didn't talk to anyone, didn't have any connection with the outside world. In fact, I'd been on a retreat for the 3 months before that, so it was kind of like a 5-month retreat. The last 2 months were solitary. So when you're solitary like that for a long time, you do, you really connect with your inner world in a way. That's, that is the thing to connect with. So I was in a very dramatic landscape, and it was in the summer. So most of the time it was very hot. But also because it was in the mountains, there was these dramatic storms. And they were a little bit scary actually, because the lightning was like, came so close. Anyway, one day, one evening, early evening around dusk, I was in the hut, and there was this massive electric storm, and it was actually quite scary. I felt as if the forked lightning was kind of landing on my porch, really. Maybe, well, probably couldn't have been, or I'd have been burnt up to a cinder, but that was what it felt like. So I stayed inside, just kind of, had a solar powered light, turned the light out, did what I thought was best, and watched the storm. And then at some point, the storm kind of abated a bit, and the light was amazing. It was sort of dusk, but then there was this strange, almost eerie kind of light coming. And so I dared to step outside onto the porch at this moment. And when I stepped out onto the porch, I burst out laughing because there in the sky was the most amazing rainbow that I had ever seen. And it looked like it looked like a picture a child might paint of a rainbow. You know how a child paints a rainbow, like a big thick stripe of red, a big thick stripe of orange, yellow, green, violet, and so on. That was what it looked like. It looked like a child had just taken a massive paintbrush and painted this rainbow kind of onto the sky, as it were. It was so vivid. It was so massive. It was sort of translucent as well. The other thing it reminded me of, not very poetically, was of those kind of multicolored ice lollies you get, where there's, I think they're called a zoom or something like that. There's different colors layered up because it was sort of crystalline. But it was just, the main thing was it was so vivid, and it just looked like it had been painted onto the sky. And it was, it made me laugh somehow, I think, just with the sort of joy of it. And I watched it for a long time. It stayed in the sky a long time. It seemed very, very close to me. And it just seemed like you could, I don't know, not exactly touch it, but it just felt like so there, and so I was looking at this rainbow, and it was reminding me very strongly of something that my own teacher, Bhante Sangharakshita, had described. It was reminding me of a vision he had described when he was a very, very young man. He was in India meditating. He was an Englishman, Bhante, but he was in India, and he was meditating in a cave. And suddenly before him, he saw a vision, and the vision was of the Buddha. And it was of the Buddha in a particular form, the red Buddha. And he said that he saw that red Buddha, and in the vision as well was the setting sun. And he said he saw this vision of the Buddha as clearly as he had seen anything in his life ever. In fact, more clearly. He said the red was like a red he'd never seen in sort of life, as it were. He saw it as clearly as he had seen anything. And recalling it many, many years later, as a much older man, he said he could still see it in his mind's eye just as vividly. And there's a very vivid description of this that you can read about. So I was reminded of that somehow, because I think, obviously Bhante's vision was much, much more subtle than me seeing the rainbow. But I think somehow it was the fact that the colors of the rainbow, the red, the yellow, were more vivid than anything one had ever seen before, actually. And although Bhante's vision of the Buddha is much more subtle than the rainbow, in a way, there's something about that. Well, what am I trying to say? you could say, what is a rainbow? That's what I'm trying to say. What is a rainbow? Is it a thing? Of course, it's not painted in the sky. It's a play of light. You know, going through the raindrops in the air, or it's a play of light, and then eventually it disappears. But whatever was there never was a thing in the sky. It was a play of light, and yet somehow I saw it as real, if not realer, than I had ever seen anything else. And I too, you know, as I'm sitting here telling you about it, I can see it in my mind's eye, but more than that, I can feel the sort of joy and the surprise that made me burst out laughing when I bring that to mind. At the same time, it's mysterious, because what is a rainbow? I know obviously roughly the scientific explanation of what causes it, but that isn't enough to describe it, is it, when you see it? And so then you kind of think, well, what is anything that we think we're seeing? You know, we think we're seeing people. At the moment, we're not seeing so many people as we're used to. We're having to use our imaginations to connect with loved ones. And I don't know about you, but sometimes, although I'm missing the people I love, especially my family, in another way, you can sometimes feel you're even more connected with them through imaginatively thinking about them, even meditating on them. So I just wanted to start with the image of the rainbow, Bante's vision, and how vivid they are, to connect us with what we're going to be doing this morning and all day, which is connecting with our imaginations, but allowing what arises in our imaginations to affect us. I think this is very, very important, that what arises in our imaginations affects us just as much, if not more, than what we see in so-called real life. In a sense, real life is an act of imagination as well. You know, I'm sitting here at the shrine with Guillaume, I'm looking at him, but, you know, to tell you the truth, I don't know really what's going on when I'm looking at Guillaume. You know, maybe he's, you know, in my imagination. In a sense, he is in my imagination. But I'm looking at him and I can tell you that's Guillaume. He's certainly in your imaginations now that I've evoked him. What I'm trying to say is what we evoke in our imaginations affects us if we allow it to, and can sometimes affect us even more deeply than in so-called real life, especially when it's very vivid like that. So today our session of going deeper in meditation, deeper in life, is about spiritual rebirth. That's the sort of other side of spiritual death which we explored over the last 2 days. It's what happens when delusion dies. And spiritual death is what is dying in spiritual death is the delusion. And how we've been talking in the past couple of days when we've been talking about spiritual death is we've been talking about, yes, undoing this delusion, undoing this sort of the knot of ourselves, the knot that we've somehow created, although we've done this at a pre-conscious level, that says there's a real me in the middle of everything, sort of in opposition to a real world out there. The Buddhist life is lived to undo that knot, if you like. I noticed that somebody asked in the chat box yesterday, well, why is that knot there? What caused it? So in a way, in some ways, we don't really need to know. In a way, the Buddha didn't really go into that whole question of why is it there. He more just said, it is there. That's how we find ourselves. If you want to answer it, you could say it's because of previous craving and delusion, but there's no first cause. You won't find a first cause in that. And I'm sort of slightly reluctant to say it's because of previous craving, although I have said it, because that then sounds as if we're something bad we've done, you know, but actually it's not, because remember, this is all at a pre-conscious level, and it's just how we find ourselves. It's kind of why we find ourselves, if that's not too metaphysical. It's why, it's what's caused us to sort of be here as creatures, actually. It's why we find ourselves. It's how we find ourselves and why we find ourselves. But the Buddhist life is lived to undo this. We don't really need to worry too much about why we found ourselves like this. It's certainly not our fault, as it were, in any ethical or culpable way. I was thinking maybe a way of saying it, what I often think about is I think of a sort of analogy for undoing the knot, a bit like atomic physics. So like atoms, you know, the middle of an atom's the neutrons and protons. That's just how atoms kind of find themselves in a way. And everybody thought that was just it, you know, that an atom was the smallest thing. And then, of course, in the 20th century, scientists realized you could actually split that atom. And if you did that, then huge forces were released, absolutely unimaginable. And of course, they were used for ill as well as good, unfortunately. But let's leave that aside and just stick to the fact that this immense force was released when the atom was split. And the force was so immense that it caused a chain reaction. So I sometimes think enlightenment's a bit like that. Until the Buddha, we just were there with this sort of knot of me at the middle of everything. The Buddha discovered you could undo that knot. Never mind why the knot's there in a way. The Buddha discovered you could undo that knot. And in the undoing, the most immense forces are released that are only for good. In the case of enlightenment, are only for good. And it's like a chain reaction, that immense force that's released that no one knew was possible. We can't imagine it. Just like before we ever managed to split the atom, you couldn't have imagined such an immense force. Enlightenment's like that. It's impossible to imagine for us. I can only talk about it, imagining I can imagine in a way. But yeah, this immense force. So that's what the Buddhist life is lived for, to learn from the Buddha that it is possible to undo this knot. And in the undoing of it, these immense forces which are expressed in love, compassion, wisdom, energy in pursuit of the good, to a tremendous amount, you know. And again, that's why we see the Buddha as radiant. You know, we depict the Buddha as gold. We imagine the Buddha as golden in our imagination, because it's you know, sort of that's trying to depict the radiance, the outpouring of that energy. So yes, so spiritual rebirth is the sort of the other side of spiritual death. Spiritual death is the death of that delusion, the undoing of the knot. And in the undoing, spiritual rebirth happens, if you like. Now, what I want to sort of evoke today is something a bit more magical and mysterious. So all week, we've been really practicing hard. I mean, I've been so moved in a way by everyone's efforts, everyone who's been joining me at 7 o'clock in the morning and meditating, really being on retreat together, putting lots and lots of effort into meditation, into expressing gratitude, connecting with beauty, practicing kindness. So we've been practicing, and we're practicing. All that practice we're doing is to help to move ourselves closer and closer, just that little bit closer to enlightenment, to that state, for want of a better word, depicted by the image of the Buddha. That's what we're practicing towards. That's an image of human potential beyond our imagining, literally, but we're moving towards that potential. As we're moving towards that, something very magical happens. And how we experience it, if we're lucky and if we're receptive, is that as we are moving towards it, in a sense, it's moving towards us. Or maybe put another way, it's moving us towards it. We experience it as if we're being sort of helped along, as if there's a force drawing us forward. Now that's quite mysterious, and it's just as true as literal truth. And we probably all experience this to some extent in our ordinary lives. How we'll have experienced it in our ordinary lives is if we've ever engaged with anything, even a little bit artistic, if we've ever tried to write a poem or paint a picture, or engage with something creative, even the creativity of a communication with a friend. That, you have this sort of, say I'm writing a poem, which I do attempt to do, you kind of think, you put this effort in, you think, oh goodness, how am I going to make it rhyme if I'm trying to do something formal? You try and you try and try. You've got to actually put a lot of effort in. And then if you're lucky, every now and then something magical happens and it feels as if the poem writes itself. And then what you've got to do is you've got to step out of the way and allow that to happen. So to cooperate with something that feels like it's a force beyond yourself. Sometimes it happens in communication as well, doesn't it? You somehow feel like, goodness, the right words just come into your mouth. And you're sort of thankful. The instinct is to look up. Maybe you've got something difficult to tell someone and you're thinking, oh my goodness, how am I going to tell them this difficult news? And then somehow you find the right words come into your mouth. And yeah, my instinct at those moments is just to say, like, thank you. It's not, I'm not thanking a literal person, but that's the instinct, isn't it? You think, oh goodness, and you want to sort of give thanks at that moment. So it's like what I'm talking about is akin to how we experience that sort of artistic, imaginative process, and not confined to just actually drawing a picture or a poem, although we might experience it more in that. And then we've got to allow that. I'm thinking of Alex and Danny Utah. Every morning they come in and they help to arrange the shrine. They do all these minute adjustments. They're both very kind of aesthetically attuned. And what I see is them, they move the flowers an inch that way and an inch that way, and they adjust them. And what they always do is they step back and they look at it as a whole. And I can see them, I can see what they're doing is they're almost waiting for it's almost as if the shrine communicates back to them, oh yes, I'm ready now. And then they settle, yeah? So that's what you're waiting for. You're waiting for almost something comes back to you. So when we visualize the Buddha, which I want to lead us through, it's a very special meditation we're going to do this morning on visualizing the Buddha. That's the way of engaging with spiritual rebirth. Actually, what we're doing is we're bringing the whole 5 stages of this going deeper in meditation together. So I'm just going to go through why that is, and then we're going to meditate together. So when we visualize the Buddha, we're bringing to mind a symbol of potential. That's what a Buddha is. That's who the Buddha is. Of course, there was the historical Buddha, but he wasn't. The Buddha's not God or anything like that. There's the historical Buddha, and there's the Buddha as representation in human form of human potential, and that gives us something to integrate around. Remember, the very first stage was integration. Integration has to be around something, and it has to be around something that's sort of big enough to hold all the parts of ourselves. So we integrate around something big enough. And this image of human potential, this image of unlimited potential, is the only thing that's big enough to integrate around. You can't really integrate around something that's limited. You can only integrate around something that's unlimited. So we're integrating around the unlimited ideal of human growth. And for Buddhists, that's represented by the image of the Buddha. Of course, the image can never, ever, ever do that justice. But the attempt to create an image is important as well. And then, yeah, as soon as we, as soon as we do that, we can connect with positive emotion. We can perhaps very simply connect with gratitude that the Buddha actually did make all those efforts 2,500 years ago to went on that quest, which came to fruition in enlightenment. So we can simply connect with gratitude to the Buddha. And we can, now this is a bit more subtle, we can be receptive to the influence of the Buddha. The Buddha's influence is touching us even now, in a sense, whether we know it or not. Just the very fact we're here in this shrine room together, as it were, means that we're in touch with the influence of the Buddha. And we can be actively receptive to that. We know from the stories from the time of the Buddha that some people weren't receptive to that. Some of the very first people who encountered the Buddha, even though they could see that there was something very special about him, just kind of, just went on their way, weren't receptive to it. So receptivity is something active. So we can cultivate that receptivity, dharmic responsiveness in relation to the figure of the Buddha. And then when we imagine the Buddha, when we visualize the Buddha in the midst of a blue sky, and that blue sky is fathomless, is unobstructed, it's an image for that there's nothing permanent, there's nothing fixed, there's nothing unchanging. That's what the blue sky is an image for. It's an image for something undefined, just as in the actual blue sky that we see. You can't see where it begins. You can't see where it ends. So we imagine the Buddha as appearing in the blue sky. That's an image for the complete openness of being. And we imagine ourselves as a blaze of energy within that blue sky. So that's very, very important, because what that's saying is that we too are not fixed. We too are not separate. We too are in a way part of that blue sky nature. We're saying that when we're visualizing the Buddha, we're not trying to add something onto ourselves, The Buddhist life isn't lived to add anything onto ourselves. It's lived to sort of let go of all clinging whatsoever. But what we let go into is beautiful and vibrant and mysterious. So we imagine the Buddha in that blue sky, and then the Buddha is the image for what happens when we let go. Yeah, so the Buddha is an image for what happens when we let go. So today, in this session, we're going to visualize the Buddha, and I'm going to lead us through that. And we're doing that because this is the great stage of spiritual rebirth. But also this stage brings together all the other stages of integration, positive emotion, dharmic responsiveness, spiritual death, and then spiritual rebirth. So we'll be meditating for half an hour together. So do make sure you're really comfortable and upright. And I'm going to set myself up as well. Good. So really taking the time to settle. Your weight dropping down, energy rising up. Softening your face. Tuning into the sensations of the body breathing. Really seeing if you can get a sense of It's just the body breathing. You don't need to make an effort to breathe. You don't own the breath. So you can just sit free of any sense of ownership or any sense of needing to control the breath. And imagine yourself completely surrounded by clear blue sky, below as well as above. And then see if you can get a sense of letting go into this blue sky. So you experience yourself as a blaze of energy in the midst of this blue sky. And the blue sky is radiant filled with the sourceless light. And then we see and feel that this radiance condenses into the form of the Buddha, made of light, just like a rainbow appearing in the sky. So we're just going to sit in the presence of the Buddha. If we can't see or feel the presence of the Buddha, then just wait. Just sit with the heart open. And notice the effect of sitting here in the presence of the Buddha. Is there even a teaching for you? And now, image or the sense of the Buddha gradually fades back into the blue sky, just the way a rainbow fades back. We can reflect that there is experience, but yet that experience doesn't map onto anything solid and unfixed. All experience is like this. And now the blue sky begins to fade away. Now just sitting completely still. Absorbing the blessings from the practice. Seeing this world, this hapless world, with all its store of woes, compassion in the Buddha heart burst open like a rose. And from that flower, that wondrous flower, there came at once to birth a breath whose perfume even now with fragrance fills the earth.